The topics and opinions expressed on the following show are solely those of the hosts and their guests and not those of W4WN Radio, its employees, or affiliates. We make no recommendations or endorsements for radio show programs, services, or products mentioned on air or on our web. No liability, explicit or implied, shall be extended to W4WN Radio, its employees, or affiliates. Any questions or comments should be directed to those show hosts. Thank you for choosing W4WN Radio.
This is Beyond Confidence with your host, Divya Parekh. Do you want to live a more fulfilling life? Do you want to live your legacy and achieve your personal, professional, and financial goals? Well, coming up on Divya Parekh's Beyond Confidence, you will hear real stories of leaders, entrepreneurs, and achievers who have stepped into discomfort, shattered their status quo, and are living the life they want. You will learn how relationships are the key to achieving your aspirations and financial goals. Moving your career or business forward does not have to happen at the expense of your personal or family life, or vice versa. Learn more at www.divyaparekh.com, and you can connect with Divya at contact@divyaparekh.com. This is Beyond Confidence, and now here's your host, Divya Parekh.
Good evening, listeners. Wonderful time, and I want to share with you guys that it's awesome time because I get to spend the time with y'all. So folks, just a couple of quick housekeeping things. One of the things is if you've got your copy from us for Expert to Influencer or the Entrepreneur's Garden, so thankful to you for your generosity. And for those of you who have not picked up your copy, if you get a chance, do so, because the profits from the book, not just one of my books, but from all of my books, are going towards entrepreneurs impacted by the pandemic. And one of my other asks is, if you can share 1 hour of your time every month, just with your family or your friend or somebody in the neighborhood, helping them out with no strings attached, do that one kindness act, and it will be awesome. And let me introduce you to our guest today. So Christine McKay, welcome.
Hello, Divya. It's so great to see you, and it's an honor to be here with you and with your audience. Thanks for having me.
Oh, it's a pleasure to have you. So Christine is a business negotiation strategist, international speaker, host of In the Vent Zone podcast, and author of Why Not Ask? A Conversation About Getting More. She holds a Harvard MBA and is CEO of When Negotiation. She has negotiated with half of the Fortune 100 and hundreds of small and mid-sized companies across 53 countries. And her mission is to reduce business failure and rates by helping people elevate their negotiation skills. Born and raised in rural Montana, Christine has been married to the love of her life for almost 30 years and is a proud mom of 3 grown children. What an impressive resume.
Thank you so much. Thank you. I love hearing it. It always sounds amazing. And then I remember all the hard work and all the stuff and the trials and tribulations that went to get all that. Some of those were not so fun.
Absolutely. So, Christine, as we talked before in the earlier part of our show, where we did not, folks, this is like something behind the scenes. We did not have time to banter a whole lot, but we had a little bit. So here comes a personal question. Can you share with us as to what is your favorite cheese, if you like?
My favorite cheese?
Mm-hmm.
Oh, gosh, I love them all. Almost all. Actually, I'm eating this really wonderful pepper cheese. It's an Italian cheese, and it's like a pecorino, but it's encased in black pepper, and it's quite tasty. But I love the cheeses, and I the smellier they are, the better they are.
All right, so I know this may be a weird question, but folks, we are going to be asking Christine some esoteric questions and some weird questions, and Christine has agreed to play along.
I am happy to play along.
Do you know if eating smelly cheese gives you smelly breath?
I have no idea.
All right. So, okay, you don't have any idea, and that's totally
No.
fine because there are no right or wrong answers.
I mean, I would assume it does. So maybe somebody doesn't want to stand so close to me after I've eaten smelly cheese. I don't know.
All right. So let's kind of like check out your childhood.
Mhm.
When you were young, were you in the habit of kind of like, leading other people, or when you were in the playground? Do you recall any moments when you were the leader and marching ahead of everyone? Not in a bad way or anything like that, but rallying people up and taking them along for the ride.
When I was little, I was actually I was bullied quite a bit.
Oh,
And so I definitely, I mean, I was one of those kids who wanted to be a leader, but I grew up in a town of 550 people roughly, and I had 20 kids in my class, and many of them were related. And so and we were outsiders, and so it was very hard to kind of break into that really tight-knit rural kind of community. And so I tried, but it didn't go over so well. So whenever I tried, I usually got beat up somehow. So I kind of waited until I was in high school to really step into leadership, and then I did it in ways that didn't require me to be in my hometown.
I'm sorry to hear that.
It's okay, it happens, and we either let it get us down, or we grow from it, and but it certainly has informed who I am and kind of the experiences I've gone through. So
and how wonderful it is that you took that experience and you have become a woman of high caliber today. And as you said, that when you listen to your bio, you're like, oh wow, I've done a lot. You took that experience and you turned it around. And that's what we want to focus on. Because if someone were to look at you today, and of course, Christine, I've talked with you a couple of times, you come across as a very confident person, like who's been like that from childhood. So kudos and bravo to you.
Thank you. Definitely not been like that since childhood. Definitely not. I would even say not even most of my adult life have I been like that. So, I think, it's after I graduated from high school, I kind of got kicked in the teeth pretty hard, not, kind of figuratively, and really struggled for many years. I struggled, and it took me a long time. I kind of joke and say that I'm a late bloomer. So it took me a long time to kind of find my stride and give myself permission to live a life that I want to live. And I see that a lot for women, that, we're often told we're supposed to be something. And I just heard somebody recently say boys get rewarded for doing and girls get rewarded for being, like being nice and being generous, but girls aren't rewarded for doing historically. And so it took me some time. It was definitely not an easy thing for me to kind of come into it. Though, I mean, even when I was younger, I was voted most likely to succeed in my class among the girls. And so I always had confidence. It just, I didn't have self-confidence, and there's a big difference.
Yes. And thank you for bringing up such a relevant point, that it's not only about finding your stride and finding your authentic voice, it's also about giving yourself permission. Because it is, I'm saddened to say that, but what happens is that most of us stand in our own way. And you're the most important person in your life. And what you're doing is standing right there, not allowing yourself to fully bloom and achieve that potential.
Mm.
So if you're okay, I would like to kind of go back to your childhood.
Sure.
You mentioned that you were raised in rural Montana. It's a beautiful state.
It is.
Do you recall any times, when you explored nature and connected with nature?
Oh, all the time. When I was very little, we lived on a large ranch, farm and ranch, and my brother and I would go horseback riding for hours, and we'd go, walk around and, swim in mud ponds and catch, animals. And I mean, we just and play in the barns, and we loved that. And my dad, we were very poor. And so we didn't really vacation until I was a little bit older, but our idea of vacationing was to go camping. And I absolutely love camping. And, people often see me and they assume that I would not like to camp. And I'm well traveled, and so that means I have a lot of points. So when I get to travel, first class and stay in nice hotel rooms. And so people just automatically assume that that's what I want to do all the time. I'm like, no, I actually love camping. My daughter and I went camping not long ago, and I was chopping wood and setting up tents and building the fire and all that. I really enjoy that stuff. I like it a lot. So.
And so many things like come with a price, and yet we tend to disregard things that are available to us right in our backyard. So what you're describing, think about it. How many kids get to do that? It's very few, especially if you're thinking about kids who are living in the suburbia. Mm-hmm. Yes, they go to park and all that, but to have that full expanse of nature and just running wild and connecting with nature and having that freedom, what did that do to you as far as you were growing up, and what lessons did you take from it?
That's a great question. And the reason why I like that question so much is that, so we stayed on the ranch until I think I was like 10 years old. And then we moved into town, and I put that in quotes because town is pretty small. So it's still really rural no matter what. But that was the first time that I really felt a loss of freedom. Was the moment that we left the ranch and moved into town. And I never quite, it took a long time to regain it. I felt like my parents made the decision to move for their own reasons. And my brother and I were not consulted because, we were 10 and 9. And so you just did what you were told. And we were really angry, and we were angry for a long time because we loved being on the ranch so much. We didn't have to check in all the time. My parents, of course, paid attention to us and watched us and stuff, but we just could go and do things in there. And it was really more about our imagination. But once we moved into town, even though it was small, it's like I couldn't cross the railroad tracks. I couldn't do this and I couldn't do that. And we had all these rules, and it was just really, it was hard. And it took some adjustment to deal with the idea that there were these rules that didn't make sense to me, that were being imposed upon me. And I kind of, probably, if I'm honest with myself, I kind of always railed against those and found ways to circumnavigate them. But yeah, so moving into town was hard. And my mom started working so at the same time. So it was also the first time that both my parents were out of the house, and my brother and I were left at home, and we were only a year apart and fought like crazy. And I remember those, and so it was a challenge. It was just a very challenging time. That move was a big deal. It informed a lot about how I saw myself in the world, I guess is the best way to say it.
I can imagine, because when you told me that you ran with your brother and just going for the mud, I recall my childhood days. We didn't live on a ranch or anything like that, but we were fortunate to have some nice trees in our backyard and some nice, bushes. And I remember taking a bed sheet and just kind of putting inside the bushes because these were all kind of
Mm-hmm.
tied and people could see from outside, but I would pretend that I was camping and just by myself,
Mm-hmm.
going for that sense of freedom or climb the trees. And I would climb the tree and sit at the highest branch that I could find
Mm-hmm.
and just feel that exhilaration because when you're out in nature, nobody's grounding you. Or I'm not saying here
Mm-hmm.
that you should not be grounding. I'm
Yeah.
giving you a perspective of a young child, and it just felt so liberating. And just being out there in the open, and of course, we were fortunate to have gone to farms for picnics and all that. So, for me, it just spoke to me. And I can
Mm-hmm.
see what you're talking about moving to town, and that youngster feeling, I just want to go and run around. And
Yep.
so, as you move through your high school,
Mm-hmm.
you did mention about being bullied, and I'm so sorry that you went through that experience. And I really hope that children, as they grow, don't have to face it because it can leave a lot of mark.
Oh, yes.
How did you deal with it, and how did you get out of that?
So I was very good at kind of creating a different, almost like a, what's the best way to describe it? I created my own rules.
Mm,
So I was the first kid that showed up at school. Like I usually beat the janitor at school. I was usually standing at the doors when the janitor arrived to unlock the doors because I wanted to be the first one at the school and I was the last one to leave. Um, that way, then I felt safer that way, but two, it gave me, I felt control because it was quiet. I could go to the library. I read. I was a voracious reader. So and I didn't read, I wasn't big into fiction books. I loved history. And so I would lose myself in the history of Cleopatra, Nefertari, Marie Antoinette. One of my favorite books when I was in high school was actually Henry Kissinger's Years of Upheaval, which is like 1,000-page book, and I read it from front to cover, from front to back. I loved that book. I loved politics. I loved current events. And then I started competing in public speaking in what's called National Forensics Leagues, which is speech and debate. And I found I loved public speaking. Not the first time. The first time I crumbled on the floor in a ball in tears, just crying, nearly vomiting because I was so scared and so nervous. But I went on to be one of the top speakers in the state, and I just fell in love with it. And that's where I started to be able to escape to other towns. I built friends. I found friends from other communities. And because in Montana, when I was growing up, we could drive at a fairly young age. We could drive at 15. I started driving myself all over the state. And, so I, had a beat up old car and I just started to drive, and I'd go see when we weren't in speech and debate season. I'd go and see my friends and drive to, towns far away from me. And that's where my friends were. I had really like one friend in my hometown, but my friends were really outside of my hometown. And that is and then I started I was an international exchange student because like I said, I loved politics and I especially loved international studies. And so I just became very outward focused, away from my community. And then I became a beauty queen when I was 16. And that further allowed me to expand my network of people outside of where I lived. So I just kind of, a lot of people, when they grow up in a small town, they see the small town as having these borders, right? And I'm stuck in this small town. So I'm just going to do, I'm only allowed to do whatever's in this small town. I pushed the boundaries and I made my community much bigger than the town that I lived in. And I would say that is something that skill has stayed with me my entire life. And that is an important, that's an important aspect of who I am. Even no matter where I'm at, I'm always looking to create bigger and more involved communities and to bring people together over whatever the topic is. So.
Well, that's fantastic, because to me, building community and building relationships with people, it's one of my core principles in life. I love building relationships because when you see that potential unfold, and Ranasuko says it beautifully, individually, we are a drop of water. Together, we are an ocean.
I love that.
And that quote just kind of grabs it all. It says it all, how powerful we can be together. Because as I was talking about initially, just doing 1 hour a month, one act of kindness. Think about it. Even if 100 million people did it in US alone, we're talking 100 million hours every month.
Absolutely.
How much of a change could we bring?
You said, when you said that at the beginning of the show, I sit on 2 boards of directors. I'm the president, the chairman of one board of director. I'm on advisory boards for other nonprofits. I am very involved in my community. And I agree with you. I would love to see more people give of their time than give of their money. And, after I graduated from high school, I discovered that I was pregnant and I wasn't married, and I just lost my job, and I got evicted from my apartment and started living in the back of my car. And for 6 months, I was homeless. And, one of the things that I learned as a result of that experience was that you really cannot truly understand what it is to give until you are forced to have to receive. Because being on the receiving end is embarrassing sometimes. It's humiliating. We're taught we're supposed to be self-sufficient. I don't care if we're talking support for physical ailments, mental ailments, financial ailments, whatever the issue is, abuse, whatever. There is shame that goes, especially in our culture in the US, there's shame that goes with receiving. But if all everyone wants to do is give all the time, then who's there to receive it? And so having a receiving heart, but with a giving heart with the understanding of receiving is really powerful to me.
Oh no, that's beautiful. So how did you make out as a young mom?
Oh, it was a challenge. I mean, I got pregnant when I was 19, and I had my first child at 20. Then I had my second child at 21 and my third child at 22. So I had 3 kids at 22. After I had my first, I decided that I was incapable of making good decisions for myself. So I abdicated to a man who thought he wanted to make my decisions for me. And I thought that was okay, since I had made such horrible decisions for myself. And he didn't believe that, women should work or have an education. And so I stayed home, and mostly stayed home with the kids. And he was not a nice guy. And, but he couldn't support us. And so we were buying groceries at the local food bank. We were, I was going through garbage cans to get soda cans to change for gasoline for our car. We'd boil water on the stove for baths at times. I mean, it was not a good situation. And one day I couldn't feed one of my kids, and she threw a temper tantrum. And I am not proud of this moment, but I picked her up and I practically shoved her into the cupboard to show her that I had no food in the house to feed her. And I was like, I can't do this anymore. So as a young mom, first of all, I want to be very clear. I absolutely love that I was a young mom. I loved being a young mom. Because, and even though I'm not the best with little kids, I like kids as they get older, But when my kids were teenagers, I was still in my early and mid 30s, and it created a different kind of a bond for us.
Mm-hmm.
And I would not trade that for the world. My kids are all in their mid 30s now, and I'm still really young, and it's just kind of cool. So I loved being a young mom. But part of what makes it easier when you're in that kind of a situation, is that you're young, because you're kind of young and stupid. You just don't know any better. You just kind of believe that everything's going to work out. And I just had this optimism. But I also, once I decided to go to college, I started surrounding myself with people who believed in me at moments when I didn't have faith in myself. And they changed my life, and they helped me without them, I would not have been able to make it.
And that is so amazing how you handled that. We're going to wait for Divya to come back, but while
Okay.
we wait for Divya to come back on, continue telling us a little bit more about how it was being a mom of 3 children.
It was, well, I mean, at first, I mean, when I was still married to my first husband, it was more the marriage that was really challenging. There were times, though. I mean, I remember one time we lived in a 2-story house, and one day I had my kids down for a nap, and somebody knocks frantically on my front door. And I open the door, and it's a police officer standing there telling me that my kids are standing on the patio roof, or the porch roof. And my 2 older ones had decided that it would be fun to play McDonald's drive-through one day. And so they were using the porch roof as where they'd stand, so that then the other one could place their order at the window. It was one of those things that you just don't think about. It's like, either down for a nap, it's like they're quiet. So you kind of, it's not like you're going up there every 2 minutes, and baby monitors did not exist at the time. So I didn't have the benefit of that. I had to only use my ears. And the thing is, and I remember one time, we had a cat in the neighborhood who robbed a robin's nest of baby birds that didn't have their feathers yet. And my kids were freaking out about these baby birds dying. And I'm like, in my head, I'm going, they're absolutely not going to make it. But there was no way that I could just not try. And so I went and I found some cans, and I went and I got gas in the car, and we drove these little baby birds to a vet clinic that had a Boy Scout explorer troop, so that they could take. And so that way, then I had done everything I could for these little birds. And, my kids gave me strength when I didn't have it. There were just times, I mean, I just wanted them to have so much more in the world than I had. I wanted them to have mentors who were women. I wanted them to see women in high places and positions of power and influence. I wanted them to see wealthy women. These were not things that you saw. I mean, wealthy women married into their wealth for the most part. We did not have that in when I was growing up or coming up. And so, and then I became a single mom, and that was hard as all. That was one of the hardest things I've ever done in my life. And, I couldn't, when I got accepted to I did a community college, and I got an associate's degree from community college, and then decided it would be easier to do without my first husband. And so I took my kids, and we went to where I was going for a 4-year school, and I became, which is called Rensselaer Polytechnic Institute in upstate New York. And I became the first woman to graduate as a full-time student, as well as being a single mom. But my oldest daughter in particular sacrificed a lot of her early childhood. She was only 6 years old, and she sacrificed a lot to help me get through that. And while I'm not proud about that, there are times when, and you look across, if you look at socioeconomics, you often see people in poor communities. I mean, heck, we just had a woman here, I think it was in Ohio, who was working at a job at a pizza joint, and she had a 10-year-old and a 6-year-old or something like that. And she left the 10-year-old in charge to watch the 6-year-old while she went to her job as a single mom, and she got arrested, right? That's obscene to me. I mean, I get the child welfare component of it, but there's still a time. What are people supposed to do? And that was how I felt. I did everything I could do within my definition of my morality and my ethics to get me and my children through that really difficult and challenging period of time.
Wow, what an inspiring story, Christine.
Thank you. Thank you.
Amazing. So that's just amazing that you were the first woman to graduate from Rensselaer Polytechnic. So did you go to a technical, like was that your major or was it something else?
No, I mean, I thought that I was terrible at math even when I got there, and so I majored in business. Now, even though I did study finance, but I actually discovered that voice recording of me telling myself for years that I wasn't good at math was actually inaccurate, and I actually am very good at math, certain types of math. And I fell in love with linear programming and linear algebra and business finance and business statistics and economics, and I just fell in love with that stuff. And so I studied finance and have it's a bachelor's of science in business administration from Rensselaer. So, and I mean, what was great about it was I actually had a number of job offers coming out of my undergrad, and I had one of the highest paying job offers out of the business school program that year. And but there was one job that I had gotten an offer on that I declined to accept because I had not disclosed to them. I remember I was on the phone with them. It was Kraft Foods. And I was on the phone with them, and they were telling me about this offer, and it was a really good offer in White Plains, New York, and all these things. And I was crying because they were one of the few companies I had not told that I was a mom to. And even though I was not legally obligated to tell them that, and everyone told me, don't say anything about being a mom, I felt like I was withholding something. Like a huge part of me that I just, and I turned them down because I didn't disclose to them that I had been, that I was a single mom. And, looking back on it, I'm like, I don't know if that was the most effective thing to do. I mean, at the time I was like, I don't know if this is the right thing or the wrong thing. And they were stunned that I turned them down for that reason. And,
no. There's something to be said about having that internal moral compass. And when you have core values, it's easy to make decisions, even though they may be difficult.
Yes.
And let's kind of circle back to a study that you have referenced and shared with me, that usually what happens is that when you take a look at young girls, they're very spunky. No, I'm not saying everyone. Most of them usually have a spunk, which is fascinating. And then as they start moving through first or second grade, and as you mentioned, when they're around 8, they start losing the power of negotiation. So Can you tell us if there is any reasoning or psychology behind it?
So this is all based on a study that was recently released by Boston College, and they looked. The professor looked at how boys and girls negotiate with men and women, starting I think at the age of 3 through 10. And what she found in her study was that boys negotiate equally with men and women throughout that entire period. Girls negotiate with women throughout that entire period. But starting at the age of 8, girls start to stop negotiating with men. And that continues. And the more girls stop asking for what they want, starting at 10, 8, and moving forward. And, as a negotiator, one of the things that I talk about negotiation styles and how we have a default style as adults. And that default style is usually developed between the ages of 6 and 8. It is developed very early. It's just kind of how if you were a kid who threw temper tantrums and called your mom names and told her how much you hated her, you're probably still doing that. And that's your default style. If you were a kid who ran and stuck your head under the pillow or you hid behind the curtains, you're probably still doing that because that's your default style, right? But what this study does, what it shows is that for certain girls at this really instrumental and influential period of time at the age starting at around 8, they quit having this conversation with men in their lives. They quit asking for what they want. There wasn't anything in particular that she pointed to in this level of study that says why that was the case. It was more focused on the fact that it is actually happening. But there's other studies out there that actually talk about how, girls, we get told to stop playing. You don't play so hard because you're going to mess up your dress. You're going to mess up your hair. And mom spent so much time, the dress was expensive, or it took me hours to get your hair that way. And so we get told to stop playing. Right. And so then we kind of get, in my personal view, is that it's kind of this overlap element that we aren't encouraged to explore. We quit being curious as women in many cases earlier than boys do. I mean, just think about all the men who as adults go to IKEA or Home Depot or take your local grocery store and take that grocery cart or that cart and just take a running jump and jump onto it and go wee down the aisle, right? And how many women do that? I mean, I do it because I love to play. But there aren't right? But not many women do, right, because we've been taught from a young age that we're not supposed to do that, that's not ladylike. That's not how girls are supposed to behave. And so I think it's just this terrible cycle that has exacerbated itself. And so then as young girls become adults, then we tell our daughters those things. I actually had this conversation because I have my children are all girls. I have 3 daughters, and I just had this conversation with them, and they're like, "Thank God, Mom, you didn't do that," because they were a mess. They would go out, they'd come back covered head to toe in mud, and they'd have mud everywhere. And they just played hard, and I just always wanted them to do that. And 2 of them hardly ever wore dresses. One of them loved them, and that was great too. But it was just, it was more about them being able to explore and figure out what their own identity was versus me or society telling them what it was supposed to be. And I think that, one of the values of Venn negotiation, and in my view, it's the skill that's most critical for anyone to be an effective negotiator, is curiosity. And we sometimes have to relearn how to be curious as adults, especially as women.
Absolutely. So, Christine, can you share with us as to what could you say are 3 to 5 skills needed for negotiation, and what women could do to add those skill sets in their day-to-day lives if they were to walk away today and enhance their negotiation skills?
So the first one is going to sound really simple, but it's actually a lot harder than you think it is. And the first one is you have to first be very clear on what it is that you want. So I use an example of buying a car. So one year, my husband's car was involved in a wreck. He and I still debate over who wrecked it, but that's fine. So the car was wrecked, and we needed to get a new one because we both needed cars, and I just didn't like my car. So I was like, well, what do we need and what do we want and what do we need in a car and what do we want in a car? And so I had this really, I did a ton of research and we figured out what model we want, all the bells and whistles, what we wanted for warranties and how we were going to deal with the dealer. I had everything figured out. And then I was like, okay, then how important are all of these things to us? So I started developing what became my trade-offs list. And I was like, I wonder if I could get 2 brand new cars for the price of 1. And so based on all my research that I did on and being clear about what it was I wanted, I put together an approach that said, let's explore whether I think that, I can get 2 cars for the price of 1. And when I do public speaking, I tell people this story and I ask people, what's important to you when you buy a car? And they usually say, the make, the model, the, color, gas mileage, reliability, et cetera, all of those things. But then I say, but do you want it today or are you willing to wait for it? Because that drives economic value, both for you as the buyer and for the dealer as the seller. But that is a detail that very few people think about. But that's fundamental. It's an illustration of how important it is to know what it is that you want. And in the end, I ended up buying 2 cars for the brand new cars for the price of 1, plus $5,000 because I was wrong on my inventory holding cost assumption. So I increased my offer, and we drove 2 brand new cars off the lot. We saved $23,000 because I did an hour and a half of research. And so, but being clear, the first thing is you have to be clear in what it is you want. Then you also have to develop an understanding of your counterpart. So I recently spoke at an event and this woman the host came up to me and said, oh my gosh, I never thought about having to think about my counterpart in a negotiation. She'd only ever thought about what she wanted out of the negotiation. And the reality is that, my philosophy on negotiation is that negotiation is a conversation about a relationship. And you cannot win a relationship, but you can get more value out of it. But you can't get more value out of it if you have spent no time being curious about your counterpart and developing an understanding of what it is that they need and want in order for a deal to be successful. It's why my company's name is Venn. It's why my logo has a 3-ring circled Venn diagram, is because successful negotiation is about that intersection point that's where common ground sits. And you can only discover that common ground if you're really curious about yourself and what you need and want, about the situation you're negotiating in, whether like in that car case, buying a car or buying a company or getting a customer. And you have to be curious about your counterpart. You must have all 3 of those parts in order to have a successful negotiated outcome. Those are 3 really big things, but all of them are steeped in curiosity.
Very powerful. And it's about also knowing that not only what the other party wants, but also coming from a place where you are thinking of creating a win-win situation, because you talked about having relationship. Mm-hmm. And when we talk about relationship, it's not just having that connection that's going to last you for a day or 2, but it's about building that trust equation to create that bridge that it's not only for day or for today, for the purpose of negotiation, but to have that relationship over the period of years where you have each other's back. And when you think from a perspective that, I want to influence them, and rather than being manipulative or coming from a place where you're pushing anybody, when you think about what you have shared, it can be so much more powerful. So Christine, share with us, where can people find you and any other information you'd like to share with our listeners?
So the easiest way is our website is Venn, VENN, so like a Venn diagram, VennNegotiation.com. You can find us on LinkedIn, Facebook, Twitter, Twitch, YouTube. And I also host a podcast called In the Ven Zone. And you can find that on any major podcasting platform, as well as our YouTube channel. But if you just search for Ven Negotiation, you're going to find or my name and negotiation, you're going to find me all over the place.
Absolutely.
And if you go to our website, I have a gift for folks if they want to check it out.
Oh, that's lovely. You have provided a lot of value. And if you were to give a quick tip, a parting tip for our listeners, what might that be?
Ask for more of what you want and expect to get it. One of my favorite Maya Angelou quotes. The thing is that we know what we want. And once we know what we want, many of us tell ourselves, well, I can't ask for that because they'll think this of me and they'll do this and they will walk away or whatever. Stop negotiating with yourself and actually ask, and then enter into a conversation with your counterpart to see what's really possible. You're going to be surprised at what's doable. And more things are doable than not. And so ask for more of what it is that you want. You deserve it. You're worth it.
Absolutely. I love that. You deserve it. You're worth it. And give yourself permission to be the person you can be and the lifestyle that you deserve. Thank you, Christine, for joining us.
Thank you, Divya. It's been a pleasure.
Absolutely. And listeners, thank you for joining us. We love you. And last but not the least, Rebel, thank you for making this show possible. And until next time, be powerful and take care.
Thank you for being part of Beyond Confidence with your host, Divya Parekh. We hope you have learned more about how to start living the life you want. Each week on Beyond Confidence, you hear stories of real people who have experienced growth by overcoming their fears and building meaningful relationships. During Beyond Confidence, Divya Parekh shares what happened to her when she stepped out of her comfort zone to work directly with people across the globe. She not only coaches people how to form heart connections, but also transform relationships to mutually beneficial partnerships as they strive to live the life they want. If you are ready to live the life you want and leverage your strengths, learn more at www.divyaparekh.com. And you can connect with Divya at contact@divyaparekh.com. We look forward to you joining us next week, Monday, 8 p.m. Eastern Time.